process of the research somehow, and then I guess the next question will be, or my next question will be also about the fictional parts in the whole work.
So maybe I'll just answer everything in one go. In a lot of my work, I think since 2017, I like the idea of mixing facts and fiction. So in a lot of the works, especially video works that I do, it will be like 80% facts and 20% or even 10% fiction. So the central character is usually somebody that I make up. It's a fictional character, but I'm not going to tell you if Leighton Raven is real or not. You just have to do more research. But then I like the idea of pseudo documentary, and actually it's sort of like the drawings that I do also. It's like, well, the drawings looks like it's a real human body, but it's with fantastical elements inside. And I like the idea of science having sort of an authority, that people look at it, they don't question it, but I can add in some weird elements to confuse people. So I think this is a pretty interesting way of work, I think. And I think it leads to how I conceptualize my video works also, because documentary is also, it's not authoritative, but it's, people seldom question documentary. They assume that this is like presenting the truth, but especially nowadays, you know, the world of post-truth, I mean, it's nice for people to figure out whether I'm telling the truth or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then we go home with a little task. But to speak about the obviously fictional part, which is the part where you turn into a disco ball. I wonder here if you could tell us a little bit more about this figure or this personage, this alter ego you also create with doing that. And also, I'm wondering, I was asking myself, it was you doing that performance, you also going through that experience. So in like this fictional setting, it could have been also someone else, but it seems very important to me that it was you. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this alter ego, Lauren, and also why is it you to do that?
Actually, when I first started doing this kind of video, it was in 2017. It's called The Afterlife of Rosie Levers. And that's my first alter ego. But of course, I didn't expect to have this continuous exploration of alter egos with my work. But only on hindsight, I think that this is the trajectory that I was going through. And I also think it's sort of like multiple personality. It's a way of survival. It's a way of tackling different problems or different social issues. So, and I find it easier to have an alter ego to talk about their story, to tie everything together. So usually I would come up with a timeline of different events or different stories that I want to talk about in the video, and then plug in the character and deciding like when the character was born and what kind of life it goes through, she goes through. And it's also, usually it's a female character. I don't know why, maybe because I'm female, it's like natural, but for this video, I tried to have a male voiceover, but it did not work. And also for a lot of the performance, I want to be in the performance because there's some kind of risk involved. For example, like being lifted 5 meters from the ground. And another video is called Cosmic Call, in which I walked on stilts. So it needed a lot of practicing, and there's a little bit of danger involved, and I don't want to endanger anybody else. Also, I think another thing is that my research process is also a way for me to figure out some answers to life, or to my own questions that I have in life. So I think having myself in the performance is sort of like a resolution, or finding an answer for myself. So.
And I wonder, I mean, you talked a little bit about let's say, the organization of the show, or how you build up this narrative somehow also by coming through the courtyard, having the circus elements, seeing this found footage, then having which you were saying is also like a mental preparation to do levitation, or for this idea of levitation, and then also talking about the dangers and so on, and then you end up we kind of are in the room and also have this spatial experience. So I wonder, I mean, and this has a lot to do with the experience of levitation, I guess. So I wonder, what was first? Was you doing the performance, or actually also training? You said you have to learn these things also, or you have to kind of exercise. Was that physical experience of yourself has any influence on the way you organized the exhibition, or no?
No, I don't think so. I'm a very practical person, so I'm not sure if the experience itself influenced how I edit the video or come up with the different footages. But the experience itself is quite interesting. We got a shibari artist. She's a girl, and then she's like really talented. So I went to her studio and get tied up and lifted up 180 degrees, and just want to know if I can, survive that, like how long I can endure, the blood rushing to my brain. So it wasn't that difficult. It was like scary at first, because I'm not a sporty person. I don't exercise. I don't hike. So it was like pretty trying for me, but it's okay. I think it's more psychological fear more than the physical, pain. Well, there's just some pain and discomfort also, but it's not that difficult to overcome.
Okay. Good. So no, that's but I imagine it. Yeah, I still think it's a very strong image that it's that you and also doing this preparation, and it's also a way to kind of really dive into the thematic also, I guess, and then this thin line between fact and fiction is I also see the boundaries there. Another thing I wanted to talk to you is, there's levitation as an important notion in the whole setting, and the other very influential image or context or structure is circus. So I guess if we think of circuses in society, in the world, it's a bit of a utopia in reality, maybe, or there is also this notion of heterotopia by Foucault. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's this his notion of what he calls spaces, like cultural, institutional, discursive spaces that are somehow other. They are worlds within worlds, and then mirroring and yet questioning what is outside. So they're like he's speaking about prisons, brothels, cemeteries, and so on and so forth. And and the circus as such is also kind of, we can put it into that context, also being like in the world, but at the same time another world. So, and this is the setting where your fiction, your film, your work is happening. So could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that use, or that kind of platform you use, the circus as a stage or platform for your work?
Actually, it's really started out because of Fern Andra. She was really a circus performer and a vaudeville performer as well. And of course, like you said, the circus is a really curious place. Like, it's like all the people involved are like marginalized people in the community, people of color, and people with what we call the disability, people who are different from the norm. So I think it's important to not to look at them as freaks, but with, so it's part of humanity. And then, of course, my exhibition is about, a rise. It's about people trying to make this world a better place. So I think one of the ways to do it is to empathize with differences and acts of differences. So having, mentioning the circus performance and circus actors, I think it's one way to remind people that, we all live in the same world and we have to, empathize with, everybody. Mm-hmm.
And maybe on that note, and I guess obvious question, and a question that might have been asked before. It's we have this speculative fiction. What the work is around this notion, and I think exactly this element of fiction makes this particular story, which includes a lot of resistance and upheaval against authorities that you place in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s movement in the US. At the same time, it's a very universal kind of story you make out of it. And then we see footages of protests, movements, and so on. And that kind of looking back to the recent history of Hong Kong, where you live, is the question that kind of comes up also is how far this work you do here, and also the conception of that work is also influenced by the situation in Hong Kong, and what your experience was also of the movement there of the recent years.
I think all artists are affected by their immediate surroundings or whatever that happens in the world. I mean, we are part of society, and our works may or may not reflect current events or the struggles in the world. But I think if you look at where the artists come from and you look at the context of everything, then I think the audience is free to pick up whatever hints they can find. And I mean, because the film is really multi-layered and it talked about so many things. I think there are things, I'm sure there are different things that people can pick up. And there's also a large part in the film that is about the conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States. So I think Cold War is also a very immediate problem that we are facing right now. And actually, after the Second World War, I don't think any of the problems of the conflict have been resolved. It's just get postponed and postponed again and again. And today we have the war going on in Ukraine. So I think whatever it is, it's about history. Like my video is about history, and history repeats itself. So I think it's really important to learn about history, especially the 1967 events, the protests. I think it resonates among a lot of people, maybe people in Hong Kong, maybe people in other parts of the world, like in Myanmar and in Bangkok and all of the world. It's a struggle of the people, and it's a universal issue, and it's a universal concern that everybody should, be aware of, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's also for this reason, I guess it's also, for me, it makes it important that there is this fictional, speculative part in that work that is also invites us almost to have a universal reading of that history, rather than being introduced to one specific historical fact or a phenomenon. So I guess that's for me, also strong element. I wonder, I mean, you were here. You were invited to represent Hong Kong in Venice. So I guess that also, that also came with a few expectations, and maybe also with a few cliches that you have come across when people saw your work or comments and so on. Because when when we look back to your presentation, also the references in the beginning, they were all Yves Klein, Susan Hiller, and so on. They were references from art history, the Western context. So I mean, it's also a bit of a cliche question I ask you now, but maybe we can, I allow myself to do that. So it's about references and inspirations, and like the context is you do your research, and and maybe also something in particular about you and your biography and career is that you studied in Canada. You have been living in Hong Kong for a long time, but you're also in between these cultures maybe. So I wonder is where do we find the or is there a Hong Kong part? Is there a Hong Kong reference? Is there a background in this? If you look at your work, and is this also something that you were confronted with in Venice now? Because all in a sudden, being the representative of a place, of a context, of a region, of a culture, also somehow.
Well, like I said before, like I started out doing anatomical drawings, which is a really Western thing, a European thing. So one of the comments from, say, 10 years ago was, oh, your work is not very Hong Kong, right? I mean, it's not about the city itself. It's not in Cantonese, I mean, the language that we speak in Hong Kong. So, but that's who I am. That's what I'm interested in. But for this particular, ever since I think 2014, I started to make more works that's related to the city. For example, the sci-fi projects that I mentioned, I invited writers in Hong Kong, actually activists in Hong Kong, to create science fiction story about the future of Hong Kong, to encourage people to think about the future of Hong Kong. So that's one of the many projects that I did. And my own work, like for example, the video works, you know, again, I mean, artists are affected by what's going on in the society. And actually, these are answers to the questions or the issues that I have about the city itself, whether it's like social, political or environmental or, you know, whatever. So, but what do you think when you saw my work? You were in Venice. So how did you read my work? Do you think it's Hong Kong or not Hong Kong?
I mean, no, I was just wondering because, I mean, this Venice principle of nations having pavilions representing their best artists is a bit weird nowadays, I guess. So, and it's kind of still waiting for that moment that this will be mixed up, whether by I don't know, exchanging the pavilions or just finding a new way to deal with that somehow. And so it's all in a sudden you end up. You end up in a very, very globalized art world, reading all the places where the artists come from and the origins. And so, and I guess, and then you end up kind of asking yourself, what is the link now to this place, or what is it? So for me, it's I read it also now after being in Hong Kong and then having talked to people. I very much read it myself within the recent history of Hong Kong, and then also the images and then the representations of a movement, of protests and so on. I think for me it's very much connected to that, but I'm sure anyone else would read it entirely different. So I do very much connect it to the place and to just what's happening now in Hong Kong. At the same time, when I look at the work and the drawings and so on, then I have a very, very universal language at the same time, a very universal pictorial language also, with and that was a bit also my question, where I see a lot of references to, as you said, medical drawings and very much kind of Western disciplines also. And so less of let's say like a formal aesthetical or also historical references, because also the story you pick, it's taking place in the US. It's not taking place in a Hong Kong or Asian or whatever East Asian context. So that therefore I was asking if this is, you know, if how this maybe comes or how did it come that that it's a historical event, or you set the whole thing in the US and not somewhere else. So
I think important for artists. I mean, the power of art is to make something that's not didactic but with multi-layers. And it's interesting is for the audience to figure out for himself or herself what kind of message is behind the artwork. If, didactic works are boring. So I don't think it's not my way to make art.
That's great. So,
no, but if you think about it, I mean, people, like, everybody can be an artist. Like, I think a lot of people can use artistic strategies in a lot of situations, for example, in demonstrations, in social movement, and organizing community. So it depends how you define what art is. Like, what I'm doing is like arts in an institution or in a gallery, but then you have artistic strategies on the street, which is like really powerful. And those needs to be, I wouldn't say didactic, but more straightforward, and needs to mobilize people. It needs to call for direct action. So there are so many different kinds of arts. So, but this is not, but yeah. I'm engaged in, the other kinds of art.
Mm-hmm.